You're listening to The Hour of the Time, and I'm your host, William Cooper. Two men in the year 1092 stood on the ramparts of a medieval castle, the Eagle's Nest, perched high upon the crags of the Persian mountains. The personal representative of the emperor, and the veiled figure who claimed to be the incarnation of God on earth, Hassan, son of Sabah, sheikh of the mountains and leader of the Assassins, spoke. Quote, "You see that devotee standing guard on yonder turret top? Watch," unquote. He made a signal. Instantly, the white-robed figure threw up his hands in salutation and cast himself 2,000 feet into the foaming torrent which surrounded the fortress. "I have 70,000 men and women throughout Asia, and each of them ready to do my bidding. Can your master, Malik Shah, say the same? And he asks me to surrender to his sovereignty? This is your answer. Go." Now, such a scene may be worthy of the most exaggerated of horror films, and yet it took place in historical fact. The only quibble made by the chronicler of the time was that Hassan's devotees numbered only about 40,000. How this man Sabah came by his uncanny power, and how his devotees struck terror into the hearts of men from the Caspian to Egypt, is one of the most extraordinary of all tales of the secret societies, the mysteries. Today, the sect of the Hashishin, or druggers, still exists in the form of the Ismailis, or Ishmaelites, whose undisputed chief, endowed by them with divine attributes, is the Aga Khan. Like many another secret cult, the assassin organization was based upon an earlier association. And in order to understand how they worked and what their objectives were, we must begin with these roots. It must be remembered, dear listeners, that the followers of Islam in the 7th century A.D. split into two divisions: the Orthodox, who regard Muhammad as the bringer of divine inspiration, and the Shias, who consider that Ali, his successor, the fourth Imam or leader, was more important. It is with the Shias that we are concerned here. From the beginning of the split in the early days of Islam, the Shias relied for survival upon secrecy, organization, and initiation. Although the minority party in Islam, they believed that they could overcome the majority and eventually the whole world by superior organization and power. To this end, they started a number of societies which practiced secret rites in which the personality of Ali was worshipped, and whose rank and file were trained to struggle above all for the accomplishment of world dominion. One of the most successful secret societies which the Shias founded was centered around the abode of learning in Cairo, which was the training ground for fanatics who were conditioned by the most cunning methods to believe in a special divine mission. In order to do this, the original democratic Islamic ideas had to be overcome by skilled teachers acting under the orders of the Caliph of the Fatimites who ruled Egypt at that time. Members were enrolled on the understanding that they were to receive hidden power and timeless wisdom, which would enable them to become as important in life as some of the teachers. And you find these same precepts in every branch, in every nationality, on every continent where the mysteries prevail. The Caliph saw to it that the instructors were no ordinary men. The supreme judge was one of them. Another was the commander-in-chief of the army. A third, the minister of the court. There was no lack of applicants. In any country where the highest officials of the realm formed a body of teachers, one would find the same thing. Classes were divided into study groups, some composed of men, others of women, collectively termed assemblies of wisdom. All lessons were carefully prepared, written down, and submitted to the Caliph for his seal. At the end of the lecture, all present kissed the seal. For did the Caliph not claim direct descent from Muhammad through his son-in-law Ali, and thence from Ishmael, the seventh Imam? He was the embodiment of divinity, far more than any Tibetan Lama ever was. The university, lavishly endowed and possessing the best manuscripts and scientific instruments available, received a grant of 250,000 gold pieces annually from the Caliph. Its external form was similar to the pattern of the ancient Arab universities, not much different from Oxford, but its real purpose was the complete transformation of the mind of the student. Students had to pass through 9 degrees of initiation, the same number that are claimed in the York Rite of Freemasonry. In the first, the teachers threw their pupils into a state of doubt about all conventional ideas, religious and political. They used false analogy and every other device of argument to make the aspirant believe that what he had been taught by his previous mentors was prejudiced and capable of being challenged. The effect of this, according to the Arab historian Makrizi, was to cause him to lean upon the personality of the teachers as the only possible source of the proper interpretation of facts. At the same time, the teachers hinted continually that formal knowledge was merely the cloak for hidden, inner, and powerful truth, whose secret would be imparted when the youth was ready to receive it. None ever questioned why no secret was ever put forth. This confusion technique was carried out until the student reached the stage where he was prepared to swear a vow of blind allegiance to one or other of his teachers. This oath, together with certain secret signs, was administered in due course, and the candidate awarded the first degree of initiation. The second degree took the form of initiation into the fact that the Imams, the successors of Muhammad, were the true and only sources of secret knowledge and power. Imams inspired the teachers, therefore the student was to acknowledge every saying and act of his appointed guides as blessed and divinely inspired. In the third degree, the esoteric names of the 7 Imams were revealed, and the secret words by which they could be conjured, and by which the powers inherent in the very repetition of their names could be liberated and used for the individual, especially in the service of the sect. In the fourth degree, the succession of the 7 mystical lawgivers and magical personalities was given to the learner. These were characterized as Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and Ishmael. There were 7 mystical helpers: Seth, Shem, Ishmael, Aaron, Simon, Ali, and Muhammad, the sons of Ishmael. This last was dead, but he had a mysterious deputy who was the Lord of the time, authorized to give his instructions to the people of truth, as the Ismailis called themselves. This hidden figure gave the Caliph the power to pretend that he was acting under even higher instructions. The fifth degree named 12 apostles under the 7 prophets, whose names and functions and magical powers were described. In this degree, the power to influence others by means of personal concentration was supposed to be taught. One writer claims that this was done merely by the repetition for a period of 3 years to train the mind of the magical word Ak-Zapt-I. To obtain the 6th degree involved instructions in the methods of analytical and destructive argument, in which the postulant had to pass a very stiff examination. The 7th degree brought revelations of the great secret that all humanity and all creation were one, and every single thing was a part of the whole, which included the creative and destructive power, the androgynous God. But as an Ismaili, the individual could make use of the power which was ready to be awakened within him, and overcome those who knew nothing of the immense potential of the rest of humanity. This power came through the aid of the mysterious power called the Lord of the Time. To qualify for the 8th degree, the aspirant had to believe that all religion, philosophy, and the like were fraudulent. All that mattered was the individual, who could attain fulfillment only through servitude to the greatest developed power, the Imam. The 9th and last degree brought the revelation of the secret that there was no such thing as belief. All that mattered was action, and the only possessor of the reasons for carrying out any action was the chief of the sect. As a secret society, the organization of the Ismailis, as outlined above, was undoubtedly powerful and seemed likely to produce a large number of devotees who would blindly obey the orders of whomever was in control of the edifice. But, as with many other bodies of this kind, there were severe limitations from the point of view of effectiveness. Perhaps the phase of revolt or subversion planned by the society did not in the end get underway. Perhaps it was not intended to work by any other means than training the individual. Be that as it may, its real success extended abroad only to Baghdad in 1058, where a member gained temporary control of Baghdad and coined money in the Egyptian caliph's name. Now this sultan was slain by the Turks, who now entered the picture, and the Cairo headquarters was also threatened. By 1123, the society was closed down by the vizier Afdal. The rise of Turkish power seemed to have discouraged the expansionist Cairo sect so strongly that they almost faded out, and very little is heard of them after that date. It was left to Hassan, son of Sabah, the old man of the mountains, to perfect the system of the ailing secret society and found an organization which has endured for another 1,000 years. Who was Hassan? Well, he was the son of a Shia, Ali worshipper, in Khorasan, a most bigoted man who claimed that his ancestors were Arabs from Kufa. Now, this assumption was probably due to the fact that such a lineage bolstered up claims to religious importance then as now among Muslims. You see, the people of the neighborhood, many of them also Shias, stated very decisively that this Ali was a Persian, and so were his forebears. So it is generally thought that this is the truer version. As the governor of the province was an Orthodox Muslim, Ali spared no efforts to assume the same guise. Now this is considered to be completely permissible, the doctrine of intelligent dissimulation. As there was some doubt as to his reliability in the religious sense, he retired into a monastic retreat and sent his son Hassan to an Orthodox school. This school was no ordinary one. It was a circle of disciples presided over by the redoubtable Imam Muwafiq, about whom it was said that every individual who enrolled under him eventually rose to great power. It was here that Hassan met Omar Khayyam, the tent-maker poet and astronomer, later to be the poet laureate of Persia. Another of his schoolmates was Nizam al-Mulk, who rose from peasanthood to become prime minister. These three made a pact, according to Nizam's autobiography, whereby whichever one rose to high office first would help the others. And that tenet has survived to this day. It is how their own infiltrate all levels of society, military, and government, and then pull their brothers up into positions below them. It is the method for infiltrating and controlling large masses, populations, governments, military organizations, and society as a whole. Nizam, the courtier, became vizier to Alp Arslan, the Turkish Sultan of Persia, in a very relatively short time. He helped Omar, in accordance with his vow, and secured him a pension which gave him a life of ease and indulgence in his beloved Nishapur, where many of his Rubaiyat poems were written. Meanwhile, Hasan remained in obscurity, wandering through the Middle East, waiting for his chance to attain the power of which he had dreamed. Arslan the Lion died and was succeeded by Malik Shah. Suddenly Hasan presented himself to Nizam, demanding to be given a place at court. Delighted to fulfill his childhood vow, the vizier obtained for him a favored place and relates what transpired thus in his autobiography. Quote, I had him made a minister by my strong and extravagant recommendations. Like his father, however, he proved to be a fraud, hypocrite, and a self-seeking villain. He was so clever at dissimulation that he appeared to be pious when he was not, and before long he had somehow completely captured the mind of the Shah. Unquote. Now Malik Shah was young, and Hasan was trained in the Shia art of winning people over by apparent honesty, which means it has the appearance or the look of honesty, but truly is not. Just as the notice of apparent violations sent by the FCC. But Nizam was still the most important man of the realm, with an impressive record of honest dealing and achievements. Hasan decided to eliminate him. The king had asked in that year, 1078, for a complete accounting of the revenue and expenditure of the empire, and Nizam told him that this would take over a year. Hasan, on the other hand, claimed that the whole work could be done in 40 days and offered to prove it. There's that 40 days again. The task was assigned to him, and the accounts were prepared in the specified time. Something went wrong at this point. The balance of historical opinion holds that Nizam struck back at the last moment, saying, quote, By Allah, this man will destroy us all unless he is rendered harmless, though I cannot kill my playmate. Unquote. Now, whatever the truth may be, it seems that Nizam managed to have such disparities introduced into the final calligraphic version of the accounts that when Hasan started to read them, they appeared so absurd that the Shah, in fury, ordered him to be exiled. As he had claimed to have written the accounts in his own hand, Hasan could not justify their incredible deficiency and could not slough the blame off upon his friend. Hasan had friends in Isfahan, where he immediately fled. There survives a record of what he said there, which sheds interesting light upon what was in his mind. One of these friends, Abu al-Fazal, notes that Hasan, after reciting the bitter tale of his downfall, shouted these words in a state of uncontrollable rage. Quote, If I had just two devotees who would stand by me, then I would cause the downfall of that Turk and that peasant. Unquote. Fazal concluded that Hasan had taken leave of his senses and tried to get him out of this ugly mood. Hasan took umbrage and insisted that he was working on a plan and that he would have his revenge. He set off for Egypt, there to mature his plans. Fazal was himself later to become a devotee of the assassin chief, and Hasan, 2 decades later, reminded him of that day in Isfahan. Here I am at Alamut, master of all I survey, and more. The Sultan and the peasant vizier are dead. Have I not kept my vow? Was I the madman you thought me to be? I found my 2 devotees who were necessary to my plans. Unquote. Hasan himself takes up the story of how his fortunes fared after the flight from Persia. He had been brought up in the secret doctrines of Ishmaelism, the Arab branch of the mysteries, and recognized the possibilities of power inherent in such a system. He knew that in Cairo there was a powerful nucleus of the society, and if we are to believe the words of Fazal, he already had a plan whereby he could turn their followers into disciplined, devoted fanatics willing to die for a leader. What was this plan? Well, he had decided that it was not enough to promise paradise fulfillment. eternal joy to people? He would actually show it to them. Show it in the form of an artificial paradise where houris played and fountains gushed, sweet-scented waters where every sensual wish was granted, amid beautiful flowers and gilded pavilions. And this, dear listeners, is what he eventually did. Hassan chose a hidden valley for the site of his paradise, described by Marco Polo, who passed this way in 1271. Quote, "In a beautiful valley enclosed between two lofty mountains, he had formed a luxurious garden stored with every delicious fruit and every fragrant shrub that could be procured. Palaces of various sizes and forms were erected in different parts of the grounds, ornamented with works of gold, with paintings, and with furniture of rich silks. By means of small conduits contained in these buildings, streams of wine, milk, honey, and some of pure water were seen to flow in every direction. The inhabitants of these places were elegant and beautiful damsels, accomplished in the arts of singing, playing upon all sorts of musical instruments, dancing, and especially those of dalliance and amorous allurement. Clothed in rich dresses, they were seen continually sporting and amusing themselves in the garden and pavilions, their female guardians being confined within doors and never allowed to appear. The object which the chief had in view in forming a garden of this fascinating kind was simply this: that Mahomet, having promised to those who should obey his will the enjoyments of paradise, where every species of sensual gratification should be found in the society of beautiful nymphs, he was desirous of it being understood by his followers that he also was a prophet and a compeer of Muhammad, and had the power of admitting to paradise such as he and he alone should choose to favor. In that order, and in order that none without his license should find their way into this delicious valley, he caused a strong and inexpugnable castle to be erected at the opening to it, through which the entry was by a secret passage, and thus the legend of Shambhala, or the paradise in the mountains, a valley of lush greenery, unending fruits, fair, beautiful maidens. Thus the legend began. Hassan began to attract young men from the surrounding countryside between the ages of 12 and 20, particularly those whom he marked out as possible material for the production of killers. And every day he held court, a reception at which he spoke of the delights of paradise, and at certain times he caused draughts of a soporific nature to be administered to 10 or sometimes a dozen youths. And when half dead with sleep, drugged out of their minds, he had them conveyed to the several places and apartments of the garden. Upon awakening from this state of lethargy, their senses were struck by all the delightful objects, and each perceiving himself surrounded by lovely damsels, singing, playing, and attracting his regards by the most fascinating caresses, serving him also with delicious viands and exquisite wines, until, intoxicated with excess and enjoyment, amidst actual, real rivers of milk and wine, he believed himself assuredly in paradise, and felt an unwillingness to relinquish its delights. When 4 or 5 days had thus been passed, they were thrown once more into a state of somnolency, and drugged and carried out of the garden. Then, upon being carried to his presence and questioned by him as to where they had been, their answer was, "In paradise, through the favor of your highness." And then, before the whole court, who listened to them with eager astonishment and curiosity, they gave a circumstantial account of the scenes to which they had been witnesses. The chief, thereupon addressing them, said, quote, "We have the assurance of our prophet that he who defends his Lord shall inherit paradise. And if you show yourselves If you show yourselves to be devoted to the obedience of my orders, that happy lot awaits you," unquote. Now, suicide was at first attempted by some to be able to return to the paradise that they had just left, not knowing that it was an illusion. But the survivors were early told that only death in the obedience of Hassan's orders could give the key to paradise. And in the 11th century, it was not only credulous Persian peasants who would have believed such things were true. Even among the more sophisticated people, the reality of the gardens and houris of paradise were completely accepted. True, a good many Sufis preached that the garden was allegorical, but that still left more than a few people who believed that they could trust the evidence of their senses. The Ancient Art of Imposture by Abdul Rahman of Damascus gives away another trick of Hassan's. You see, he had a deep, narrow pit sunk into the floor of his audience chamber. One of his disciples stood in this in such a way that his head and neck alone were visible above the floor, and around the neck was placed a circular dish in two pieces which fitted together, with a hole in the middle. And this gave the impression that there was a severed head on a metal plate standing on the floor. Now, in order to make the scene more plausible, if that is the word, Hassan had some fresh blood poured around the head on the plate. Then the recruits were brought in, the initiates. "Tell them," commanded the chief, "what thou hast seen." Then the disciple, appearing as a head on the plate, described the delights of paradise. Quote, "You have seen the head of a man who died, whom you all knew. I have reanimated him to speak with his own tongue," unquote. And then he would really sever, treacherously, the man's head, in real earnest, and stuck for some time somewhere that the faithful would see it. And the effect of this conjuring trick, plus murder, increased the enthusiasm for martyrdom to the required degree, and gave him unbelievable control over his flock. There are many documented instances of the recklessness of the Fidain, devotees of the Ismailis, one witness being a Westerner who was treated a century later to a similar spectacle to that which had appalled the envoy of Malik Shah. But we've got to take a break first, folks. Don't go away. I'll be right back after this very short pause.